I think that's why King David, wrote so many psalms and sang so much, because it was a way for him to navigate, I think, some of the things that were going on in his life that he couldn't just confront, but he did it through music, and I think that's powerful.
When we go through heartache and crisis, God has many different ways to reach us. He may use loving relationships, the beauty of nature, or even our work. Whatever that unique space is, he can use it to show us his goodness and glory in the darkest places of our lives. Music is how he reached our guest this week, longtime Christian musician Matthew Ward, after he tragically lost two of the closest people in his life. If you would like prayer for grief or any other issue on your heart, World Challenge now has a prayer line. Call 833-WC-PRAYS, that's 833-WC-PRAYS, or visit pray.worldchallenge.org, and someone will be honored to pray with you. Before we begin, we want to let you know that your support makes a difference. We would not be able to create podcasts like this without generous listeners like you. Thank you for making this and other World Challenge resources possible. Now here's our host, Gary Wilkerson.
Hey, it's good to be with you here. My name is Gary Wilkerson, and this is the Gary Wilkerson Podcast. I'm here with Matt and Deanne Ward. Thank you guys for coming in and spending some time with us today.
You betcha.
Let me tell our friends that are listening a little bit about you guys. Matt and Deanne have been involved in ministry and in missions for many, many years. We met each other when we were teenagers, really, in a little town called Lindale, Texas, where there's a whole bunch of ministries going on. My father, David Wilkerson, was there. You guys, second chapter of Acts, had your own headquarters, ministry headquarters there. Keith Green, Leonard Ravenhill, Youth of the Mission, another group called Agape Force. You remember Agape Force?
Dallas Home and Praise.
Yeah. But Matt, you were the voice of the ages, incredible musician and singer. And Deanne, you come from some people know Matt and maybe not as familiar, but you come from a ministry family as well. Weren't your family involved in missions?
They served our community for years. I learned a lot about serving, which is why I went into ministry. By watching my parents. My dad would go down to the inner city and play basketball and take donuts and take milk and then do Bible study and just kind of hung out and fourth generation charismaniac. Have pictures of my great grandparents, black and whites, hands in the air.
In the 50s.
Wow. Yeah.
They're all just
Bible study in their house. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well,
same as you, Assembly of God.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
Summer camp.
You grew up in the church.
Awanas. Christian schools.
Wow. Yeah, we have a lot in common.
Yeah.
And then, let's go back then. Okay, tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
Sure.
You come from several generations of charismatic Christians. Your family, not so much. Not so much.
We were charismatic, all right, but we weren't necessarily Christian.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Yeah. No. My dad's side of the family, very Norwegian, don't you know? He said, screen door and thousands of years. I mean, he had it bad. So his side of the family, they were not they didn't go to church.
Okay.
My mom, she was Irish German. She was Catholic and very devout. And of course, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. So he went to church because it was the thing to do. But my dad, we went to church. We were not Christian. Our background was not.
Big family too, right?
I'm the youngest of 9 kids, 5 boys, 4 girls.
Baby of 9.
Explains a lot.
It does explain a lot.
And the oldest, how many years older is your oldest sibling?
She turned 80 this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 20
years
older.
Yeah.
That's
a significant chunk.
So
that's just having kids.
Some of them were already gone by the time you were born. Some of the kids were already
we're already married. Not gone like rest in peace, but gone like holy matrimony.
Right.
Yeah. So my mom was pregnant with me at my oldest sister's wedding.
Wow.
Yeah. And she said, "You tell anybody, I'll kill you." She was not too excited about that, but I thought that was kind of cool.
Gives new meaning to a shotgun wedding. It's like instead of the bride being pregnant, the mother is
the mother's
grandmother.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So just take a minute to describe what that was like. Your childhood.
From the time I could remember, my mom was sick. She was misdiagnosed. They thought she had epilepsy, but actually it was a brain tumor. So she was sick from the time I literally could remember. She passed away when I was 10.
Okay.
And then my dad died 2 years later when I was 12. And there were still 4 of us kids living at home, me and my sister Nellie, who's right above me, and then the 2 kids right above her, Tony and Jack. And Tony and Jack stayed in Sacramento, which is where I was living and where I was being raised until my parents passed away. And then Nellie and I went to live in Los Angeles with Buck and Annie, and that's where the group, the second chapter of Acts, started. Was really through just tragedy and Nellie and I pulling up a piano, chairs around the piano. Annie taught herself to play. Buck bought her this piece of junk upright piano,
Wow.
and she taught herself how to play. We'd come home from school, and we just listened to her like, I got a new song. I'm like, okay, you got a new song. What is that? I didn't even know what that meant. But we just sat down. And, So we just started to sing with her. It was kind of a time of healing for us after our parents passing.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that until looking back years later what that was all about. But I think that's what God was up to. He was mending us in kind of an odd way, but powerful way.
Music is quite healing, isn't it?
It can be. Yeah. It's almost daunting in its ability to, kind of sustain and create and patch and heal.
I don't want to get too far off your story, but I do want to ask you to speak to that issue a little bit. Like, do you have any, in your history in music, do you have any whys to why music is healing as opposed to maybe the written word or the spoken word, like a sermon? Do you have any idea why music seems to touch people in wounded areas and healing than other?
I think it's one of the first things God used in creation. If you look back, even at our arch enemy, who was the choir director, if you will.
Right.
Music has always had a place. The Lord would send out the musicians before the warriors, before battle. Well, why did he do that?
Yeah.
Who knows? But I bet he had some good reason, because it would mess him up. Like, that guy's playing a harp. I got to get out of here. Don't blame him. I'd get out of there too. Somebody's playing a harp. But I don't know. Music's just got, and you can look at it historically. I think it has a way. I think it processes in a different place in your brain than the spoken word does.
Yeah. It kind of does. I've heard it does kind of end around, like, so if you're hurting and I speak to you directly, like, don't get hurt, don't
don't
should
do
be okay. That's one thing, but it's like you can put your defenses up, where music sort of gets into parts of our brain and our mind and our soul that the written or the spoken word doesn't do. So
I think it can. Yeah, I think it has a way of. I think that's why King David, wrote so many psalms and sang so much, because it was a way for him to navigate, I think, some of the things that were going on in his life that he couldn't just confront. Yeah. But he did it through music,
Yeah.
And I think that's powerful.
Yeah. And that would be, so going back to your story, then that became healing for you, just you and your sister singing.
Yeah, and like I said, I had no idea at the time that that's really what that was. But looking back, that's what I would equate it to, is that the Lord was kind of patching up our hearts in some ways, and binding us together in a way that I don't think could have happened any other way than through music. Yeah. Like I say, it has a way of getting in your heart and changing things in your spirit a little bit.
And did that suffering that type of, because I wanted to ask you on about ministry and mission and marriage and all these great things that you guys have experienced, but part of the story I wanted to have you guys tell a little bit is that you've been through so much hardship, your many years of ministry and marriage and impact around the world, and we can talk about that later too. Yeah. It's not been all easy, and so for you it started, at 10.
Yeah.
And then
really before that, watching my mom
being sick,
get sick and sicker and sicker, and watching her die. So really, it started from like I could remember having pain. And
looking back now, how did that affect you? What kind of person did you become because of that loss?
I think it affected me some ways, real negatively, because I think it threw up big defenses. I'm not going to get hurt that way again, period.
Right.
So I have to put these walls up and hold people at arm's length. And I think that's why I developed a sense of humor. I think that was part of my defense mechanism.
Right.
And just to hold people off, that's just, I don't know. That was the thing for me, was just deflection. was one of the main things that I think that was not good that I got from it, was to deflect pain instead of learning how to not necessarily embrace it, but recognize it and let it do what it needed to do.
Wow.
Yeah, it was incredibly huge. And I think from the time my mom died to the time my dad died, those 2 years, I was a zoo animal. I mean, I was off the charts. I would disappear in the summer. People wouldn't know where I was. I'd spend days down at the American River just camping and hanging out with friends. My dad'd be like, "Where have you been?" "Well, you're okay. Here's a hot dog." You know, I mean, he was a hard worker. He didn't have time to worry about me, man. He had bills to pay.
So and he was suffering.
Oh, he was suffering terribly. Yeah. And then and he died 2 years later. You know, he died of leukemia. Got him.
Wow.
So
you saw him go through.
I saw him go through even more physical. It was harder for him physically than the stuff I saw my mom go through, because that affected her balance and her ability to do this, that, and the other. My dad, I mean, it just totally jacked him up. I mean, he'd come home from the hospital with, all they could do was infusions. They didn't have treatments back then, and so his legs, he looked like he had elephantitis. His legs would just be all totally swollen. And I remember the day the day he literally died. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, and he needed help getting his shoes on. I remember helping him get and his lungs were filling up with blood. He couldn't breathe. He was like, like that, and that was the last time I saw him. Helped him put his shoes on.
And he died that day?
Yep. One of my brothers or somebody took him to the hospital, and he worked up until just about the day he died. The doctor's like, "You should not even be conscious."
Yeah.
He was a brute. I wish I had half of his work ethic, man.
You do.
I guess I do.
And I,
two
people who know you quite well.
Yeah.
We'll shout it out. Yeah, we do. You do.
Yeah.
You're a hard-working man.
But
so when you're 10 to 12, do you know how to? I mean, you don't know how to process it. So your grieving was to run away a bit, or to,
my grieving process was to internalize, and at the same time to not just. I would internalize the things I didn't understand. Like, I never got to the place where it's like, "I hate you, God." I never felt like God did this to me.
At that time, did your family have any kind of a different relationship with God, in the sense of still
Not
up
yet.
to this point you're still going to kind of mass?
Not
So
yet.
you were filtering it not through the lens of somebody who's like, "I'm really close to Jesus and I can pray about this." It's more like, "What the heck's going on? I don't know."
Oh, exactly. I didn't know what in the world was going on. So I couldn't really, as a kid, I didn't have the tools to embrace that kind of pain, but there wasn't anybody around that I could pour into to get those things out of my own heart.
Right.
I couldn't offload it.
Yeah.
So I was walking around with these bricks inside of me that I didn't know what to do, so I just would throw them at people.
Yeah. Right.
That's a good way of putting it. But yeah, so I just in some ways it was incredibly detrimental, and in some ways it helped me grow up a bit, even though it was kind of all sort of warped my perspective on some things. The way I looked at the Father Heart of God was completely twisted up. I didn't see him I saw him as someone who loved me absolutely conditionally. I had to meet all these requirements.
Yeah.
I had to be so righteous or so good. I didn't know what righteous was when I was a kid. Not a bad kid.
Yeah.
I just didn't think God would hear me. I mean, he didn't hear my parents. Why would he hear me? I'm just a kid.
Yeah. Wow.
And so I walked through a lot of that hurt, and I didn't really know how to process those things.
I can't imagine that. I can't imagine a kid losing both your parents, and then having a little bit of a knowledge of God through some, Catholic mass, and then trying to talk to him some way. Like, do you love me? Do you care about me? That had to be. And so you had. Then how did you actually come into a relationship with God?
Well, even though I say I was raised in a church that I didn't understand the lingo. I always had this deep appreciation for what I sensed as was the Lord, even in those services that I didn't understand.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? And I hear these hymns, and I ended up having a deep love for music because of the hymns I first heard in church.
Cool.
Even though I didn't know what a mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark. Really? Okay. A cow that goes 9 to 5. Cow.
Bulwarks,
a bulwark. I had no idea, but I remember right before my mom died, my dad got mad at me because I drew on a wall that he painted inside our garage that he made into bedrooms. We needed to make the most out of our 900 square feet.
Wow.
Anyway, but I remember painting this scene, and in my mind, from what I remember, it was like an altar, like inside of a church, and it was very elaborate. I'm sure it was. I was probably 8 years old. It was probably a couple of years before my mom died. She thought it was stunning. She thought it was beautiful, and I felt the presence of God when I drew this thing.
Nice.
I'd like to see it now. I'd probably be like, oh, that's hilarious. Well, it looks like a Sonic, sign or something. But and my dad was just totally torqued, Can't believe you drew on the wall. He just painted over it, I was like, my masterpiece. Anyway. But the reason I say that is because that was my first kind of inkling of seeing God as someone that was real and not just somebody I heard about in catechism or in classes, but somebody that was real, that I felt his presence. That was early on, and then I just didn't sense him at all for a long time. So after my dad died, Nellie and I moved to LA with my sister Annie and her husband Buck, and we started doing music together with no ambitions, no ideas, no preconceived, like, we're going to start a group and then we'll sing and we'll become famous. It's like, oh man. I mean, and it was really funny because we're all a bunch of introverts. Most of my family, not all of them, but most of them are. I'm a severe introvert. I've just learned how to channel that because I've been in front of people since I was 13 years old. I've had to do it. It's been part of my makeup. I can pull it off. I don't care for it, but I can do it. I'm not a schmoozer, man. It is, I'm not like, whatever. I'll go to a party. I'll hang out with the 3 guys I know. And there's 40 people there all like, so what do your kids do? Blah, blah. And I'm just like, whatever, man. I'll hang out with them. So that's kind of more me. But I really watched for a while when we first moved into LA. And Nellie and I just kind of like were watching Buck and Annie and we started going to this Assemblies of God Church, first AG of North Hollywood. Okay. Pastor Sanders was the pastor then back in the day. And I didn't understand because I was always taught if you leave the Catholic Church, you're going to burn in hell. It's the church. You can't, right? So I was like, do I want to burn in hell or, hell, church, hell? They were pretty much on an even keel for me. But anyway, so I just started watching these people at this church. I wanted to see, okay, well, what makes them different? What are they laying claim to that is different than what I have already? And so I watched for a couple of months. And I started seeing people that just seemed to have a real spirit of joy in them, that it didn't seem to match up with their outward circumstances. How can you be at such peace when things around you wouldn't qualify those feelings, right? So I thought, well, maybe there's something to this. And so I accepted the Lord into my heart, said the magic words and, repented and did all this stuff that we do. But I feel like the Lord really showed up and forgave me of sin, that I felt a weight come off of me. And I really believe that was the moment that, as we refer to it as being born again, I felt like my spirit was renewed. Everything in me had changed in an instant. And of course, there's things you walk through. There's emotional, mental things that you still process. It doesn't mean you have a new brain, but it is renewed eventually, right? But my spirit was clean. I came to life in Him.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you coming in today.
Absolutely.
Good talking with you.
Thanks
Love you
for
guys.
having us.
See you. Talk to you later.
Life can be incredibly painful at times, but God is always near to His children, and He wants to show us how He will heal and transform our grief into something glorious. As we grapple with pain, we must always know that we can go to God and He will never turn us away. Each week, this podcast reaches thousands of listeners with biblical encouragement and thoughtful commentary. This critical work is made possible by the generous contributions of individuals like you who believe in World Challenge's mission. Thank you for listening and supporting. This Gary Wilkerson podcast is brought to you by World Challenge. Sound design for this episode by Mike Hall-Smith. This episode was written by Rachel Schmitz. Our producer is Chris Wickington, with video production by Aaron Gale. We hope you tune in next week to the Gary Wilkerson podcast to receive more encouragement. Until then, do all you can to live a better life and make a better world through Jesus Christ.